Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate you taking the time to attend this webinar on a Parent's Guide to Creating Safe and Healthy Spaces During Transition to Adulthood. We at PHP understand the unique joys and challenges of raising a child with special needs. And given your busy schedules, we are honored that you have chosen to spend your evening with us. My name is Corinne, and I also have Karen with me. We are both education resource specialists with Parents Helping Parents. And we are lucky to be joined by Laura Beth Doherty. Laura Beth is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She specializes in working with caregivers and families. And she works with individuals, couples, siblings, groups, and multi-generational families to provide support in areas of family roles, communication, stress reduction, anxiety, depression, grief, and addiction. And she has been the facilitator for the English-speaking PHP Caregiver Support Group, which I'll give it a plug. It's held every Wednesday evening, and it's hosted along with Karen. So Laura Beth has been providing us that wonderful support group and leading it since January of 2020. So in this webinar, Laura Beth will detail what proximity is and how it is a useful tool to balance closeness with healthy space. She'll also talk about the quality and quantity of closeness that is appropriate to be supportive allies to our transitioning child's autonomy, and the right proximity to balance fears, anxiety, stress, and start the foundation for a successful transition from advocate to ally. Next slide, which is our title tonight, Parent's Guide to Creating Safe and Healthy Spaces During Transition to Adulthood. And at this point, I'm going to pass it on to Laura Beth and let her take it from here. Thank you.
I wasn't unmuting, but there I am. Hi, everyone. So tonight we're going to be talking about change and growth. And this is a season where we need, like all the other seasons, we need some tools. And so the tools tonight, one of my favorites is the flashlight. How do we hold a flashlight as our children transition to balance their own autonomy and our allied support? And so, because sometimes we've usually been in front of our children, sometimes we're going to be beside them, sometimes we're going to be behind them, and sometimes we still need to be in front of them a little bit. And so a flashlight is really helpful in all of those areas. And so we're going to look at a flashlight that is called proximity. And it's just like any other proximity, it's how close and you are to something. And so in relationships, proximity looks like the quality of the time and also the quantity. So we can be a little farther away from our child, but have great quality relationship, or we can have a lot of quantity while we still have quality. But that also requires some adjustment in us, because there is that mama or papa bear instinct. And sometimes our kids need us to back away from that a little bit, but to still be available and safe and secure. So how can the right distance and amount of proximity help to balance fears and cement the foundation for a successful transition? So what we're going to look at tonight is the next slide is how close we are to one another. And so I'm going to use as a lens interpersonal neurobiology, which is, some of you may know about Dan Siegel and some of his work looking at how we relate to one another. And so we're going to look at the quality of the connections whether we're very close or far away. We want the still to have a great quality. And what a lot of his findings show us what we already know. Our neurodivergent kids teach us a lot when we let them. So we have, there are goals to being, that help us to know how close or how far away we should be. Healthy circumstances. We can make supportive decisions about how close and how far away we should be. Healthy relationships are a decision that we make of how we work with family, friends, and community. And as our children transition to adulthood, they are going to have more and different opportunities to interact as their own person in within family, friends, and community. Love reveals everything that's unlike itself. This is terrifying for our children who have shared their purest love at a very early age, only to have an unreliable and confusing response in many situations. They've seen rejection, they've seen abandonment, harsh and unjust criticism, and unfortunately, some of our children have even faced violence. So those things lead to over-identification with their greatest fears and their self-criticism. And with our proximity, we can turn on a flashlight and we can, or light a candle and share with them a guide to who they are inside. And so that love is revealed from within. So I'm ready for the next slide. So some of the things that our children specifically face are unrealistic social expectations, task requirements that they don't understand, unknown or unfamiliar social expectations, and unrealistic and unachievable expectations on themselves. And what we're going to talk about a lot tonight is how we can come along before them, beside them, or behind them, either very close or from a distance, and help them to balance some of these distressing situations that happen for them. I'm working 2 slides there. You all, the good news is you all are going to receive a lot more information than is actually on your slides. So what I'd like for you to do is just to follow along and then know that you're going to get all the information. So some of the areas of strength and weakness that impact proximity for us as the parent. People pleasing can be very challenging when our kids begin to triangulate or sabotage. And they started that a long time ago, but now as they're becoming adults, it's going to have a different look to it. Consensus building can feel like when we're trying to build a consensus with our child that we've always been in the leadership role, sometimes it feels like a pinky toe hold. And I say, take the win. Let them build a consensus rather than win the day. When you have made progress, take a break. Too many victories are lost in the decision to press forward. Pause, breathe, assess, consider the next step. Measure carefully the potentially high cost of peace. And that's going to be more important as our kids are getting older, because they are going to have more of an opportunity to just cut us off. So sometimes peace is the way to go. time to see the situation through their lens. And I can tell you as a mom, that's a really hard thing to do. I end up going to my interpretation of their concern, which appears to be empathetic, but I actually need to hear my child. And I'm saying this, I am a special needs mom myself. I have to listen with my eyes. I have to listen with my ears, my heart, and my mind, and acknowledge their hopes, their fears, and their concerns. They, in this situation, are the major stakeholder, and keeping that in mind can build successful collaboration. That's an adult switch. Now they're the major stakeholder. We are a very interested party, but for us to be truly their ally, we have to let them take that stake. We need to approach that collaboration from their emotional and developmental age. So there are areas where we give them a great deal of autonomy, and there's areas where we are more involved. All this requires us to check in with ourselves. Am I present? Do I need a calming moment? What's happening with my breath? My thoughts? Am I in need of a resource or a support? So these are the determinants of quality and quality of closeness, and how the right distance and amount of proximity can help to balance us. Okay, next slide. So according to, and I call it IP&B, this is interpersonal neurobiology, healthy relationships with ourselves and others require us to integrate our mind, our brain, and our body. Each person is an individual, and they are in connection with others. So according to Dr. Dan Siegel in his book Mindsight, which is a 2010 book, there's been a number of books and updates to this, but this is the main cement. There are 9 basic areas that require integration. And some of those we're going to be more successful with our kids than others. So I'm going to talk about the ones that are going to be the most successful for us. And then at the end, I will go ahead and add in some of the others, because sometimes we need to integrate with other people, meaning our mind, our body, our relationships. We need to have conversation, connection, and resources. So the first one, and this is the next slide, is integration of consciousness. This is when we are aware of those things that we can and can't control, and our willingness to stay open to those things. Sounds so easy, and it's the hardest. So there's no time to go through this right now. I would actually, if you can, I would take a picture of this can and cannot control sign and put it on your phone or somewhere where you can get to it quickly. It will help you a lot as you are navigating proximity with your emerging adult. So the next slide is the healthy mind platter. And any of you who have done much with me know how much I love the healthy mind platter. So this is where, just like we need our daily supply of vegetables and meats and proteins and carbs, our relationships need a healthy balance of the types of thinking that we do and the types of thinking that our child does. So a lot of our kids are logical and linear, and they can also be very literal. So keeping that in mind and keeping in mind that that is where they are in their best moment, or that we're in our best moment, is really helpful. The right brainers, they're the more creative, they're metaphoric, they're symbolic. A lot of our kids are that too, or they can be that way in certain areas. So for us to truly have proximity with our children where we are collaborating with them, it's important for us to understand um, who they are in terms of their brain. So how does that matter? We can build proximity with our kids by engaging with them in activities that interest them. So we become more of, as our kids become adults, we're a little freer in many cases to be more of a friend. And that can be through engagement in activities that they enjoy and that we enjoy together. So that's the first two. The third area is the third hemisphere is what's called vertical integration. And this is how we connect with our kids through physical and emotional health. So we can we can't tell our kids what to eat every day anymore. But we can be aware that gut, heart, and lungs all have neural networks that communicate with the brain. So we still have an opportunity to fill their plate with good communication, kindness, support, reasonable hope, those kinds of things. We can still feed them all the time. We can use our proximity, and actually this is a way that we can back away from them a little bit, because we can build a trusted relationship. We can say, I know you're really smart. I know you have great ideas. I know you see the world differently from me. And we can encourage them and actually have a stronger tie. And through that, we not only have an emotional connection, and enjoy one another and actually have better health. When we acknowledge in those rough moments that we are experiencing big emotions at the same time. So we are having one emotion, and our child, who is now an adult, is having a very different emotion. So we acknowledge that we are both having a big emotion that's different. So their fear would probably be missing out. Our fear would be fear of a mistake. We have the opportunity to expand what I call, and it's called in DBT, the window of tolerance, which means we are a little further away from one another, but we have more strength, more balance, more foundation. And that makes it possible for both of us to get out of a space of fear that we're stuck in. That one is one that is a little tougher to understand. The important thing is that we continue to feed into our children. We trust you. We believe in you. We are having a different moment from you right now, but we are both having a moment, and that's okay. We can see things differently, and that's good. Um, sorry, I'm having a little, okay, so I'm ready for the next slide. Can you hear me? I need the next slide.
Laura Beth, we might be having some technical glitches here. Corinne, you're muted. What I'm seeing on the slide is feeling down.
When we
might feel
feel
like.
down,
Okay. Are you?
Oh,
Seems like we're going in and out. We apologize. Laura Beth is graciously hosting this from the East Coast. I don't know if there is a problem with the connection.
do you have me
okay.
now?
Yes,
Yes,
we're back now.
we're great.
Okay.
Is this the right slide, Laura Beth?
Yes,
Feeling
this is the right slide. Yes.
okay, excellent. Sorry about that.
So we might both be down, we might both be up, or we might be feeling that differently. So when we need more of a connection between us, where we need to be more tolerant of one another when we're going through, when we're having a different emotion, it's good to know what it is that we're experiencing. So if we're having a down emotion, we might feel disconnected. We might feel foggy. We might have intrusive thoughts. We may feel low energy. We may feel numbed out. We may feel shut down. As opposed to amped up, which feels like panic and shaky and fidgety and reactive or aggressive or defensive. And when we name the emotion and share it together, that gives us more opportunity to widen our window of tolerance and get back to a place where we can communicate. Can you all hear me?
We're good. Thank you, Laura Beth. You're great.
Okay. All right, so the next slide. So what's the benefit of coming to an understanding of where we are and expanding our proximity, taking a moment to be more present and connected together can help us to feel safe and calm and clear and have greater compassion for ourselves, which we can then share with one another. It can give us a minute to regulate our emotions and to feel like we are more on the same page. So we're not being either overly emotional or becoming a robot. We are two adults because our child is becoming an adult, and we are relating to one another in a very different way. So it takes some calibration, some practice, some balance, and some give and take between us. So how do we get there? And that would be the next slide. That's weird. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm a little bit ahead for some reason. That's okay. So how do we get to that place where we are on the same page? We identify our emotion, and each of us has the opportunity to name our emotion. And then we might want to talk a little bit about how we're interpreting the moment we're in, what our thoughts are, what we believe about the moment, and what our assumptions are. And we can share that back and forth in a different way now because we're both adults. We're gonna use some emotional regulation skills because we're kind of like a canoe in a rough sea. So, but we can work off of our relationship and actually build that and become intentional and present and connected to one another. Sometimes we need more practice. We haven't gotten there yet. We might need to use something like affirmations where we're gonna, we might need to challenge our own thoughts on something. We might need to actually take a break from one another and take more proximity. So, and we might need to do something like sensory soothing. So we might need to stop and have, you know, some ice water, or we might need to take a walk or do something that can help reduce our proximity so that we can bring it back together. Let me get to the next. Okay, so the next slide we're now ready for. So the fourth sphere is memory integration. So when we and our kids can let go of things that happened in the past and not become overly fearful about things in the future that we can't predict or control, because this time right now we're kind of looking back at when you were a little kid, or, oh my goodness, you know, adulting is going to be really hard. Sometimes we just need to take a moment and get present and do that together. And when we do that, our kids are going to experience more success. We just need to slow it down and allow our thoughts to not go back to, oh, well, they made that mistake, so they're going to make it again. Or this is, you know, we are thinking about things that we don't know or can't control. So take that time to get on the same present page. And that takes work on both of our parts. And we probably have a little more experience than our kids. So this is a place where they may look to beside them or slightly in front of them, but always in a mode of the present. So now we're going to start to move through them fairly quickly. So the next area is called narrative integration. And that is our people have been at the same event or even with friends, and you find that we're all at the same event and yet we experienced it very differently. Well, we did the same thing with our kids. Our kids will see the world very differently. So when we have a narrative integration, we are learning to retell our story, but we're telling it as a collective story of hopes and dreams through the perspective of a person who can be successful. So we're helping our child to remember who they are, dream of who they can be, and we're there saying, yes, you've got this, not I've got you, you've got this, because that's the new narrative. That is going to be an expanding narrative. It's going to start small and then it's going to grow. But that's the hopes and dreams piece. So the next slide is the sixth of the 9, and it is what's called state integration. All of us have parts that make up our personality. They form who we are and what we believe about ourselves and the world. And some of these parts are from our very beginning, and other parts are things that have because of experiences that we've had along the way. So how do we interact with our children's belief system of themselves? when they're young, we are very involved in that piece. And we hope that we are a big part of their compassionate voice, and we're probably a little bit of their critical voice too. But so now that we are, an adult with an adult, our proximity level is going to be non-judgment, curiosity, asking them, what is it that you would like to be doing? What are some goals that you have? How are ways that you're going to stay safe? What are the things that you're thinking about? What are your hopes and dreams? So that you become for them a safe and trusted person. So instead of being the person who's molding them, you are now the person that you become a mirror for them. You become a flashlight for them. You become that person that they can, that's their rock, that they can connect to, but then let go and go swim again. So this is an area where if your kids are doing well, these are almost narrative type conversations. If your child is struggling because they've had trauma or because of limitations that are brought on by their disability, you're going to receive a lot more information in the slides that I won't go through tonight. But it definitely, there's some good resources and information there, so that you can continue to do more research for yourself. So the seventh area is an area called interpersonal integration. And that's where this is one of the most beautiful and really hard ones. This is where we honor and support our differences in each person. And when we honor and support how we are alike and different, we promote what's called neural integration. So our neurons actually connect and tie with our child's neurons. So in a way, by being apart and by giving space, we actually weave closer. And this is, so the mind is energy and information flow. So when our child has openness and space to look around, they can look and see you in a better way. If you're really close to them, they actually can't focus because they can't see. They don't have a perspective. So by being a little further away, but supportive and strong and holding that flashlight, you're actually closer. You're actually safer. You're actually a place where they look at you and they say, my parents accept me. My parents think I'm interesting. They think I am an individual. They see me as a person of worth. They see hope and they see encouragement from you, and they are able to then absorb that to themselves. Well, if my parents believe this about me, then it must be true. So how do we do that? So I said, instead of fighting for the 30th night in a row over homework, sometimes just set that down and consider back at that healthy mind platter, take some time in nature or do something creative or play a game. Find an experience that you share together and decide that maybe that's a little bit more important than that lesson that you wanted to teach. in times of conflict, there will be times that things will need urgent attention, but sometimes we can take just a split second and communicate what our feelings are rather than about our feelings. And that can help us to connect, because if we can tell our child we're worried without all the detail, they can build that story actually for themselves. And there's more room for a connection. That means avoid the temptation to make it stop, to solve at all costs. And that is really hard because as parents, we want to minimize our children's suffering. And that's not a bad thing, but sometimes we have to step back. And that means that we might watch our kids suffer in a way that we don't like. So we're coming up on number 8, which is this starts to tie together the first 7. This is when we're built. Remember that narrative? We're going to build a narrative that honors the reality. This is like a universal reality that we seek certainty, but that change is the only constant. This is extremely difficult for our kids. It is difficult for all kids as they go from their teens to where there's this moment of doubt. And all of a sudden, I'm not king of the hill. And yet we have an opportunity to honor that as the reality. Like, yeah, we're always going to look for what's certain. And sometimes in a narrative, we find the piece that's certain. And the certain piece might be, my parents will always be there for me. And the world is going crazy, but I know that my parents have my back. Which means that you need to be at their back, not in front of them, making them more fearful and confused. But this is where it's a little slippery, because we become closer by acknowledging and honoring the beauty of their uniqueness, their autonomy, and the reality. Oh, this one's so hard, that they alone are their own expert. Oh, rats. We wanted this for them. We wanted that for them. We wanted them to not suffer. We wanted it to be easy. It's none of that. Never has been. And we love them still. We love them more. We love them differently. Okay, that brings us to number 9, transformational integration. This is an important hallmark of becoming an adult. It's the integration of who we are in relation to others. What is our identity in our family, in our school, in our job, or in our community? For our kids, for all kids, it's confusing. For our kids, it's especially confusing. So as you can see, as we've gone through, we start with very concrete, and then we grow out into those more esoteric, which is where it's challenging for our kids. And some of our kids will grasp these in some ways far better than typical. In other areas, they will struggle. And that's where it's just important for us to know them, to understand them, to know where we hold the flashlight, where it is, and how big the flashlight needs to be. We are a flashlight. We are also a mirror. Our proximity can can create the integration of we, which is the highest form of integration. So sometimes it's a you've got this, and sometimes it's a we've got this. And in many ways, we have a different level of closeness with our kids because of the way that we've grown together. We have a we that is, it's just a little, it's unique, it's special, and it's beautiful, but then so is everyone's. So we've gone through a lot of different, things that have to do with proximity. So, and we can actually now go to the next slide. We're not quite here yet. I want you all to just hear my words for a minute. So what proximity tells us about ourselves? Because this isn't what we're doing for our child. This is what we do, and it reflects to them. When we have appropriate proximity, we have enough compassion for ourselves that we can be compassionate with others. We have the courage to be curious without being overwhelmed by fear. We have appropriate proximity when we are in the right place to be a safe and compassionate observer. We are aware of ourselves, we're aware of how we're triggered, and we are also aware of how we may become a trigger. We can trust ourselves to do the right thing, even if it doesn't feel right. When we have appropriate proximity, we can recover from a mistake and even learn from it. We can stay connected to those we love and not become isolated in our own internal thoughts. And we can take on the level of ownership that we can, where we have the right to ownership, which is with ourselves. And then in that way, we reflect it on to our kids. So the cool things about proximity is when we have good proximity, we know when we're sad or we know that we're overwhelmed, and we're aware of our space and what we need safe. So those are all good things, and you're going to have that list. And now I want to talk for just a little bit about the things that we can do to help with proximity for ourselves and for our child and for our family and our community. Take care of ourselves emotionally and physically. As caregivers, we don't do that enough. We might need to step back from our child long enough to take care of ourselves with healthy habits that help us to cope. Slow our words down so that we speak with kindness and intention. Remember that we want to be close enough to show that things matter, but removed enough that you don't say things that can't be unsaid. So we need to say the things that are important to say, but we need to say them in a way that we wish we could put that back in the bottle. And that means that we need to maintain objectivity. We need to be aware of our triggers. And when we're aware of our triggers, we help our children to know what their triggers look like. We need to be aware of our cross boundaries. A lot of people show up in my office because they have boundaries, but nobody's respecting them. So how do we make ourselves aware of those? And then we need to be aware of our own needs, because we're going to be much better indicators of our children's needs if we're aware of our own. Okay, we are to the last slide. We're going to maintain mindful proximity, and that means we are going to stay present. It's nice to stand in proximity and look back at the past and say, hey, that's where we were. And to look to the future with reasonable hope and say, this is where we might end up. We can also look at and teach our children moral perspective. Is what we are doing right now really the best action for everyone involved? And we can mentor that, and we can also start to teach our children how to ask themselves that question. When we are fearful, there is a really good chance that we are either too far or too close. Most of the time, if we are fearful, we are too close. So when you start to feel that fearful feeling, which is often called a mother's instinct, know that it's a good thing. But it's good to listen to it in the present time. So remember to take care of ourselves emotionally and physically. It takes the time that we don't have, but that's another whole series. So let me just say it's really important. It's important to step back from our child long enough to enable us to cope. I think we're done. So I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Laura Beth. I know we have about 10 minutes left. We do need to launch our poll quickly, but we certainly appreciate what you've shared with us. And I think that we can all relate to what you've described and the emotions and the situations that we all have experienced. I will remind everyone that we are going to share your slides, and you will be able to reflect on what Laura Beth has presented to us today and put some more time into it. So I'm going to launch the poll. The reason we launch these polls is so that we can just see how best to help families and make sure that we are providing them with information that is valuable. So if you won't mind taking a minute or two, we'll get that going, and then we'll start with questions. Hopefully everybody can see the poll. Is it visible? Okay, we're getting moving now.
It was visible for me. Yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure. I see that I didn't see anybody. It was just taking a few minutes, but it looks like people are moving. So then we can get to a couple questions, which would be great. And I'll just take about 30 more seconds. We appreciate it. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. So, Laura Beth, we do have some questions that I will read to you out loud, and then perhaps we can just answer them as best we can in the few minutes we have left. The first question is, how do we recognize our closeness that is healthy?
Um, Healthy, let's see, okay. We look through a lens of fear. If we are close to our child and we are, there's a sense of curiosity, of closeness, even though we are close to them, there is an openness because there's a dialogue or there is a pleasurable activity, or there is what I call generous conversation, like where they are clearly comfortable asking us questions or maybe asking about hard things, or we are asking them about things that are tied to their hopes and dreams and their personhood that's different from us. Then we know that we have good close proximity.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. The next one is, how do we as parents find coping skills to deal with our own fear about the future or shame or guilt from the past?
That's a great question. And it's an ongoing journey. I strongly recommend compassion theory. So just go onto Google and look up mindful self-compassion. And the cool thing about mindful self-compassion for us caregivers is it's super efficient, because all the things that we give to ourselves, we then have available to share with our children. And so what self-compassion looks at is things like, we are suffering, but all of us suffer. We are, when we are kind to ourselves and acknowledge that we are suffering, we have access to better choices than if we try to shut it down. And that because we suffer and everyone suffers, when we share our suffering with others who are also kind and compassionate, then we can help each other. That's a cool thing that Karen and I do every Wednesday night, is we sit back and we watch how parents support and help each other. And we just try to do our best to stay out of their way.
Thank you. And then there's a comment just thanking you for all the information and asking that we continue to provide information and support for parents. And then there's another question. Can you share thoughts on body-based, somatic, or body movement-based therapy to handle anxiety, fear, stress, and even a traumatic response to the suffering?
I am a huge fan of somatic therapies. I am not trained in somatic therapies. And it is really important that when you're doing somatic therapy, you work with someone who is well trained. In areas of trauma and development, I have seen miracles. And I believe that we are at the tip of the iceberg. I think there is so much more that we are going to learn. We have learned so much in the last 5 years, and I think in the next 20, we are going to learn a ton more. So I would say go after somatic experiencing therapies, and make sure that the person who's doing them has the correct training.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? We have a couple minutes left. Looks like we're doing okay. While I'm waiting, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. Thank you to Laura Beth for your time it's so valuable, and I love hearing from you. I can apply it to my life as well and what I'm working on with my children. So I appreciate it. And as Laura Beth mentioned, she and Karen do host an event for Santa Clara County residents on Wednesday evenings. It's a support group for caregivers. If anyone has any follow-up questions, if something comes to mind later on, please contact us by phone or email. We'd be happy to work with you one-on-one as well. There's plenty of support groups, plenty of resources that we would love to share with you. And it looks like we don't have any other questions that have arisen. It is 6:58. Did you want to close, Laura Beth, with anything? I'll leave it to you.
Okay. You know what? I wanted to, I'm going to end with a story about I'm going to tell a story on myself. So recently, one of my children has had some physical struggles and has been through a pretty rough time. So I think that I'm so open and have all these resources and this and that. And I comment to a friend of mine who's a retired doctor about all my great ideas. And my son is in my children are in their 20s. And that I think this and I think this and I think this. And my friend basically reminds me that that is not actually what my son wants. And so all the things that I want for him are really just he helped me to realize creating conflict. And that what I really needed to do was to ask my son what it is that he is, what he's up for as far as medical treatment. And that he's in a very different place. So what that reminds me is that we all have work to do, and that we all have fears, and that our fears wreck our proximity, and that when we talk with a friend who loves us, who cares for us, who cares for our family, there are great opportunities to see ourselves through another lens. And so the good news is that I've backed way off, and my son is now doing a lot of the things that I wanted him to do, because he now owns them. It's not me bugging him like he's 12 years old.
Great life lesson. It's amazing to hear it applied. What you're teaching us, you use as well. That makes sense.
And with differing levels of success. Sometimes I have to go back and admit a mistake and try it again.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us.